empty plains. Flat, open, featureless. An endless horizon of empty earth. Beneath you, something shifts. You look down, your feet standing above a spring, small and trickling, burbling up from the ground below. The waters spew forth and begin to spread, rapidly drowning this endless expanse around you. In shifting waves, the level of the water comes beyond your nose, and you struggle to try and swim with it, but find your feet anchored to the ground beneath you. The surface escapes you upward, leaving you in freezing depths, fathoms below. Around you in all directions. Wonder. A single massive yellow serpent eye appears before you. Then another, big and small. Your entire periphery becomes dozens and dozens of different yellow eyes. Return.
Are you all right? Yeah, just another dream. You
slow
feel like you're
stream.
not gonna wake up from a dream.
Howdy doody do this. Hey Nix, hey Dread. Hope y'all are having a good night. I am trying desperately. No, I'm trying to catch back up on the there we go. On the production for the month. So we're doing a bit of a late night stream. I did do a couple of hours, sorry, a couple of chapters earlier tonight off stream just because I only had like 40 minutes to slip in. And I don't think I'm going to go super late. I want to get at least another hour in and then see how I feel because I was ahead all month. And then over the weekend, I slipped from a couple of hours ahead of schedule to a couple of hours behind schedule. So I just want to take the next couple of days, put in some extra time, and get caught back up. Hey, what's up, Swiftness? Been finding myself nicely motivated recently, which has been nice. Oh shit, I fucked up chapter 20. Yeah. Oh god, that's such a good beer. Okay. Chapter 21. Uh-huh.
Chapter 21.
Good morning, Nix. Howdy do.
Chapter 21. No trumpets blared when they set forth from Ammon, and there was no assembly of troops in the courtyard to see them off. They received even less of a parting ceremony than they had had upon the seat. Only Cal was there to bid them farewell, his hood drawn up against the rain. He wore his cloak of red, but the mystics who accompanied Lauren had stowed their own cloaks in their saddlebags and wore plain brown. The success of their mission relied upon secrecy, and it would not do for a party of mystics to be seen making their way across the kingdom.
Making their way.
As Lauren gained the saddle atop midnight, Cal gripped her ankle. She looked down at him, bracing herself for a final biting remark. But he only said, "Remember your vow to me, girl." She softened somewhat and nodded. "I will." "I believe it." Then he stepped closer, and his voice dropped so that Lauren had to stoop to hear it. "Forgive what I said in anger, and after too much wine. Jordel's death was not your doing. He was his own man." Lauren could not reply for a moment, and she blinked hard as she drew her hood up against the rain. "He was that," she said at last. A single guard at the gatehouse observed their passing, and before midday, Ammon was lost from sight behind them. Naya and Lauren led the procession. Chet followed just behind Lauren and to her side, almost as if he was ready to spur his horse between her and Naya at a moment's notice. Lauren saw, but she made no mention of it. The last thing she wished to do was call attention to the rapidly growing divide between him and the mystic. They stayed on the main road all that day and camped within sight of it that evening. But early on the second day, they split off onto a less traveled path that plunged straight into the heart of the wilderness. If they were lucky, and the weather not too harsh, the side roads would only cost them 2 days on the journey, and it would be that much harder for the family Yeren to observe their approach. But the sky did not cooperate. On the third day, they were blasted by the heaviest rains. On the third day, they were blasted by the heaviest rainstorm Lauren had ever seen in her life. It forced them from the road to ride beneath the trees, and even that did little to shield them. Naya called them to a halt long before the sun had gone down. The storm did not pass the next day or the next. They had underestimated the fury of Veldemar's winters, and the journey became a cheerless affair. After the second night camping in the rain, Shiun let them build a fire against the weather. "No one will be able to see its glow through this storm, unless they have almost stumbled upon us already," she said. "And secrecy will do us no good if we freeze to death." Lauren was surprised that they even could build a fire in such weather. But Uzo set about with sticks and leaves and built a little shelter against the rain. He did it effortlessly, and though it looked a flimsy thing, it did not rock in the wind, and it kept the rain from dousing the wood. "We learned this trick as children," he said, the first time Jem praised him for it. The boy had scooted up close to the fire, practically sticking his frozen hands right into it. "These storms come every year, and there is nothing to be done about them. The world cannot stop to appease the sky's anger, and so those who travel in such weather must learn how to endure it." One morning, when the storm was particularly fierce, Naya commanded them to remain camped there for the day. When Lauren objected, Naya shook her head firmly. "We are at your command, Nightblade, but it would be foolhardy to press on through this. The winds might pick us up and carry us away, and besides, the horses will tire themselves to death against such a battering. We must hope that one day's rest will not make any great difference." She found a place in the jungle where the trees kept off the worst of the rain, and there she commanded the mystics to drill. Uzo and Jormund practiced against each other. Lauren marveled at how Uzo, though he was by far the smaller, was able to keep up by using his speed and skill as much as his spear. Though young, he seemed a most capable warrior. She was not surprised that he had survived the battle on the seat. Jem followed along with the two of them for a while off to the side, until Weeth took pity and practiced his sword forms with him. Shiun stood apart from the rest, practicing her archery against a tree. Lauren stayed with them for a while, but she had no interest in training. Instead, she returned to her tent, which Chet had never left, and fumed to him. "Here we sit, helpless against the weather," she said, trying without success to wring the water from her clothes. "Some agents of the High King we have proven ourselves." "I do not know that I think this is so terrible a thing as you seem to," said Chet, grinning at her. "I can imagine many fates worse than being trapped in a tent with you for days on end." Lauren scowled and slapped his shoulder. Lauren scowled. Loren scowled and slapped his shoulder. The 6th day was the worst yet, but at Loren's insistence, Naya commanded them to press on. They had already lost too much time, and a day of rest had filled them all with an urgency to keep moving. But the road grew worse and worse, and their horses kept slipping in the mud. They had to ride upon a riverbank for almost 2 hours straight, and the footing was so uncertain that they almost lost Jormund to the floodwaters. Naya called them to a halt hours before sundown, and the frustration in the camp was palpable as they all built their tents. Soon afterwards they sat around the fire, staring into its licking flames, saying nothing. Out of all the party, Weeth had seemed the least affected by the sour mood. Now she looked around the fire and gave a low chuckle. A sorry lot we all look, and all for the sake of a little unpleasant weather.
I would call this more than a little unpleasant, said Jormund. The big man's broad shoulders were hunched over his bread and meat to keep them dry. He tore another chunk off his loaf with his teeth. But Jem seemed to appreciate Weeth's attempt to lighten the mood, or else he was still grateful for how she had practiced swordplay with him, for he smiled at her.
I do not know about that. I grew up in a city that would become filthy in the summer, so that the smell of it pervaded the countryside all around. During those times, I would have welcomed a storm such as this to clean out the gutters and the back alleys. As you say, said Weeth, smiling in turn. I think the kingdom of Aegis would welcome a storm to soak their lands. They have lain dry and barren for generations beyond count. Indeed, said Jem, puffing out his chest. He raised his voice, shouting into the storm that still pelted them. In fact, I am glad to be in such a storm as this, and not back in Ammon, where I could be warm and dry. But across the fire, Uzo snorted.
I do not love the storm, but I am glad to be gone from that place, darkness take it. Better these wild lands than all the old guard staring down their noses at us.
A cold snap seemed to rush through the camp. A cold snap seemed to rush through the camp. Weeth and Shioun went stone still, looking at Uzo in shock. Naya sat up straight from her place by the fire and slammed her wooden plate down upon the ground. Loren tensed, though she was not entirely sure what was wrong. Enough of that talk, Uzo, said Naya. We are all of us mystics, old and new. I will not have you bring division to our ranks. Uzo avoided her gaze. Beside him, Loren saw that Jormund was scowling, though he did not speak in Uzo's defense. Am I understood? Said Naya.
Yes, Captain,
said Uzo, though no one could miss the tinge of defiance in his voice. Naya stared at him a moment longer, as if daring him to look up. Weeth looked ashamed on Uzo's behalf, which was well, Loren supposed, since Uzo did not look ashamed in the slightest. Jormund's face had gone a shade darker, as though he barely restrained himself from an outburst. At last, Weeth cleared her throat. I spoke in jest before, of course. This storm can take itself back to whatever pit in the darkness it crawled out of.
Pit.
Whatever pit. Whatever pit in the darkness it crawled out of. Jormund let loose a long, low sigh. He looked up and forced a smile, as though determined to forget the discomfort of a moment ago.
And do you notice how it only started after our journey began, and grows stronger the farther south we travel? It is like this mission is elf-cursed.
Weeth chuckled easily. I doubt the elves care one way or another about a party such as ours. But Uzo's scowl deepened, and he shook his head.
Elves. Do you all believe in such tales?
Uzo, said Naya in a warning tone. Loren looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? He met her gaze, unflinching.
You mean you believe in elves as well?
Uzo! barked Naya. His eyes flashed as he met her gaze at last. Can I not speak my mind on something so trivial, Captain? Or does your order for silence extend even to my disbelief of superstitious tales? Naya was about to answer, but Weeth spoke first, cocking her head. Do you mean to tell me that you do not even think elves are real? Uzo turned to her, his glare softening somewhat. Of course not. No one but the witless would think so. Lauren did not even know what to say to such a thing. She looked at Chet and Annis beside her. They both raised their brows and shrugged. But Jem looked between Uzo and Lauren, his brow furrowed, as though he were suddenly unsure. Naya spoke, a contemptuous smile playing at her lips. Uzo is a farm boy from here in Feldemar. From the north, are you not? Uzo stared at her and gave a slow nod. Naya shook her head at the rest of them. He is practically an outlander. Elves rarely trouble that part of the world, and as a result, many of their elders have begun to forget. But Uzo rolled his eyes. They have forgotten nothing. They only stopped believing campfire stories. Do you ever notice how every time a story is told about elves, it is always a tale of someone far away? And always, too, it happened a long time ago. Who has seen an elf in living memory? Have you, Captain? Naya did not answer. Uzo looked around the camp, but no one spoke up. Lauren felt a curious burning in her breast, a heat that crawled its way up the back of her neck. She realized suddenly that her hands were clenched to fists. Chet put a hand on her arm in warning, but she ignored it. I have, she said. That sent the whole camp into silence. Jem and Annis looked at each other nervously, while Chet ducked his gaze. It sounded like a boast, and she had not meant it to. The mystics all stared at her in wonder, even Uzo, who clearly had not expected to be challenged. But he recovered quickly, shaking his head. What do you mean? He said. You cannot mean that you have seen them. You heard from someone else. I saw them, said Lauren. With my own eyes, as close as you and I are now. Closer, in fact. His nostrils flared in anger. Then tell the tale of it. Explain yourself if you are so wise in the way of such things. I do not know that I need to follow your orders, Uzo, she said. Uzo's anger became a smirk. I thought not. By all the tales that are told of elves, if you had seen them, you would be dead. But Weeth shook her head. That is not true. There are all sorts of tales about elves, and the only thing they agree upon is that you never can tell what they will do. Sometimes they will kill everyone in sight. Sometimes they will walk straight into the middle of a campsite, or even a city, if some tales can be believed, and kill just one person. Just one. A king, or a peasant, or even a babe. Once they decide you must die, you die. Other times they leave you be. That is the great terror of the elves, that no one can know their intentions, and that there is no escaping their wrath if they turn it upon you. She turned to Lauren then. This explains much, she said. I knew there was something odd about you from the moment we met, on that ship in Brecker. It is something in your eyes. I have never seen its like before, but I have heard it can be a sign of those who are elf-touched. Lauren frowned. Others have said much the same thing. The Lord Prince even remarked upon it. I thought it was only their color. That seems to catch most people's attention easily enough. Weeth shook her head quickly. It is not only that. Wizards like me can see it more easily than most, but it is clear to you all if you know what to look for. Look at her, Uzo. You can see it, can you not? Uzo stared at Lauren for a moment, and she saw recognition dawn upon him. He turned sullenly away. I see only a pair of green eyes, he muttered. But Weeth looked at Lauren and gave her a little smile. Lauren tried to return it, but she felt suddenly out of place. Everyone around the campfire returned to their meals, studiously avoiding looking at her. Only a moment ago, Lauren had felt like a member of their company. If not a mystic herself, then at least a friend to this group of them. Now, though, other than to Chet and Jem and Annis, she felt like an outsider, somehow apart from the rest of them, and someone to be avoided. But one pair of eyes lingered. Naya still looked at her, and the mystic's face was a curious mix of trepidation and wonder.
Chapter 21 done. Chapter 21 done. 21 done. 21 done. Can't believe we're halfway through May already. Blech. Blech. So what was it about Moon Knight that made you have to redo your fantasy series, Dread? Hey, Jagtress. Yeah, burning a little bit of midnight oil. Over the weekend, I went from a couple of hours ahead of schedule to a couple of hours behind schedule. And I really want to see if I can finally hit my monthly target. So I'm catching, over the next couple of days, I'm going to be trying to put in some extra time to catch up and get back on track to do 60 hours this month. And if I don't make it, then I don't make it, but I was doing really, really good until this weekend. Well, you're hardly the first person to come up with Shadow Knight, and neither Moon Knight is also not the first story to come up with Shadow Knight. All right, Nix, don't worry about it.
Chapter 22.
Ah, yes. Without the effects rack, it sounds like absolute ass. Ass.
Chapter 22. Lauren rose with the dawn the next morning and left the camp to relieve herself. When she had finished, she straightened and drew her trousers up again. Just as she finished tying the drawstring, Naya stepped out from behind a tree, making Lauren jump. "Good morning, Nightblade." "Sky above!" cried Lauren. "What were you doing there? Were you watching me?" Naya only rolled her eyes. "We are on campaign, at least of a sort. There is little room for modesty in a war party. Do you think the rest of us cannot hear the grunts you and your lover let out when the moons are high?" Lauren could feel herself turning a deep shade of red. I thought the sounds of the storm. But Naya cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. "Enough. I only came to ask you if it is true, what you said last night about the elves." "I am no liar." They studied each other for a long moment, Naya searching for something in her eyes. At last she gave a small nod. "Very well. I meant no offense, but it is a most unusual tale. Then again, much about you seems unusual, and mayhap this explains why. When did you see them?" Lauren shrugged, a little put off. "Some time before I came to the seat, when I traveled east across Dorsey." Naya's shoulders slumped, as though she had hoped for a different answer. "I see. It was after the Great Rocks, then, when Jardel fell?" Lauren cocked her head. "Yes. Did you know him?" "No. I have only heard stories. Who does not know the exploits of the Nightblade, after all?" Her look of burning curiosity faded, to be replaced by a familiar small smirk. "In particular, they speak of the hatred between you and the merchant Damaris. Is that why you are so eager to pursue her to Dahab?" "I do not hate Damaris. I only wish to see her brought before the king's law." "Oh, but she is worthy of hate, is she not?" said Naya, her smirk taking on a feral quality. "Many in the mystics have tales of the family Yeren, of their cruel dealings and the corpses that may be laid at their feet. Yet we only mean to capture Damaris. Would it not be easier to kill her? Does she not deserve it?" A chill went through Lauren. "That is not my duty. No doubt the king's law will deliver whatever sentence is just." Naya snorted. "Mayhap. Yet if the end result will be her death, why should we not do it ourselves?" She studied Lauren's face for a moment, but found no agreement there, and so she sighed and looked away. "Oh, do not look at me so. I am half jesting, after all. Though it would be cleaner, certainly." Lauren peered at her, a thought slowly forming. "What did Damaris do to you?" Naya's nostrils flared. "I do not take your meaning." "Whence came this thought? You have known from the start that we did not set out to kill her." "I have never seen the woman before in my life." Naya shook her head and turned away, but not angrily. Rather, she looked like a woman who had just remembered something she had not meant to forget in the first place. "The family Yeren, then," said Lauren. "What are they to you?" Naya turned back, and it was as though she had never been angry at all. "Nothing, Nightblade. Nothing more than an obstacle in our mission. Only sometimes I think the king's law is too slow, and in the name of justice it allows injustice. Sometimes I think the king's law is slow. Law is too slow, and in the name of justice it allows injustice to live too long. But though you may wish to believe differently, the mystics are not above assassination to achieve our ends." Lauren suppressed a shudder. She supposed it was no great surprise, but still it was not pleasant to hear. "That is hardly honorable."
nor are those we are sometimes forced to kill. Yet if Cal wished Damaris dead, he would not have sent us. He would no doubt employ a Drayden. Then the whole affair would be taken care of with little fuss. The name of Drayden made Lauren pause and study the mystic more closely. What do you mean? Have you never heard of them? Said Naya, raising an eyebrow. That is odd. They are well known throughout all the 9 lands. I have heard of them, certainly, but I do not understand. Why would Cal employ one of them? Theirs is a dark name. So is the family Yerins, and yet we mystics have many dealings with them. Do you know nothing of the Drayden killers? Lauren shook her head. They are assassins without peer. They work in the shadows, and they never fail to eliminate their mark. Mostly they work for the benefit of the family Drayden itself, but sometimes they can be hired, though it takes a hefty weight of gold. But surely Cal... Lauren let her words trail off. She had almost said that Cal, at least, would not employ assassins, even if the mystics would. Yet before the thought could reach her lips, she knew it was foolish. Mayhap he would not do so lightly, but if he thought it was the only way to achieve an end, she did not think he would hesitate. She realized that Naya was studying her face as these thoughts raced through her mind. Poor little Nightblade, said the mystic. Her voice had gone quiet and held none of its usual veiled barbs. You are surrounded by dark deeds and darker times. Yet not all is darkness, said Lauren, lifting her chin. And the darkest night is still lit by the moons. I knew a Drayden, Korad, your former Lord Chancellor. He proved his loyalty when he died, battling... He proved his loyalty... Proved his loyalty when he died, battling the shades within the High King's palace. Naya turned to the tree beside her and picked at it with her fingernail. Yes, I never met him myself, and I had always heard he was a terror to the soldiers who served him. But he knew his duty. They let a long silence stretch between them, a respectful moment for the dead. Then Lauren cocked her head, remembering the night before. What did Uzo mean last night when he mentioned the old guard? Nothing, said Naya at once. He is young and newer to the mystics than some. Such a combination rarely breeds temperance. I have never had much temperance myself, said Lauren. But what did he mean? But what did he mean? Said Lauren.
Tongue clicky,
said Lauren. But what did he mean? He said something else when we were in Ammon, something that turned your mood dour, as it did last night.
Ooh, look at that click. That's a beauty right there. Don't find a click like that often in the wild.
As it did last night. I will have an answer. Oh, you will you? A spark of mischief shone in Naya's eye, the jibe returning to her voice. But then she sighed, and her expression grew more somber. Cal is of the old guard, and he assembles mystics to his side who share in his beliefs. For hundreds of years, the mystics have had one purpose, to preserve the king's law, and through it the 9 kingdoms. Of course, said Lauren. That is their purpose, is it not? It is. But some mystics have grown weary of that being our sole pursuit. Our order holds much power now over the 9 lands, not only because of our soldiers and the great number of wizards within our ranks, but because of our many connections to the wealthiest and most powerful families across the 9 kingdoms. Only in the order of mystics will you find Yerins and Draydens working side by side, as well as many members of the nobility. In our oaths we forsake all ties to the families whence we came. But in truth, blood is not so easy to cast aside. If all the mystics with powerful connections were to act in concert, united by some common purpose, we would be powerful indeed. Have you never heard our order called the 10th Kingdom? I have not, said Lauren. Her mind went racing back to the village of Strappa, where mystics had pursued her and Jordell as they searched for Zane. Derek, the leader of their pursuers, also thought of the mystics as being of two kinds. He had even slain one of his own soldiers. This one was a poison within our ranks, he had said. But Jordell had been furious with him, for he believed that all were equal who wore the red cloak. "But still I do not understand," said Lauren, shaking her head. "You say that they are not happy with their duty, but what else is there?" "Nothing," said Naya. "There is nothing else." "Do not be coy with me," said Lauren. "What do they wish to do? You say they have influence and could wield it. To what end?" "There is no end," said Naya.
Excuse me.
"They are aimless, unhappy with their state of affairs, but with no plan to improve upon it. And do not worry, Nightblade. You will never find me being coy with you." That made Lauren's cheeks burn, but, too, she could sense that Naya still withheld something. It made her suddenly nervous to be traveling in this grim company of red-cloaked soldiers. She felt as though for some time now she had been swimming with the flow of a river and had only just become aware of a dangerous undercurrent that she could neither see nor predict. Naya must have seen her anxiety, for she gave a sad smile and stepped forwards. With 2 fingers, she reached up and brushed a lock of hair behind Lauren's ear. "These are far too many worries for a woman so young. Free your mind of such troubles, Nightblade. They are for the red cloaks, not the black." Lauren stared into her eyes for a moment. Then she pushed past the mystic, making for the camp.
I have said it before, and I will say it again. It's about the yearning. We now return you to our regularly scheduled program.
Making for the camp. 2 days later, they awoke to a gray morning with rain lighter than they had seen in some time. They were nearing the journey's end, and the sight of better weather brought their spirits up. "This is a good omen," said Shion. "If this holds, we could reach the hub before sundown." "Then let us press on as quickly as we may," said Annis, rubbing at her arms through the sleeves of her shirt. "And when we have concluded our business in Dahab, let us remain there a while, or mayhap forever. I mean never to spend another night in the wilderness battered by rain if I can help it." After a meager breakfast, they set off, and whether because of the prospect of reaching the end of their road or the weather, their mood was now almost cheerful. There were snatches of conversation as they followed the winding paths through bogs and marshes, and once Jem offered to sing Uzo a song, though Naya quickly told him to be silent. "We have seen nothing to tell us that we are being watched, but still we should be cautious," she said. "And by no means should we go singing through the woods and call our foes down upon our heads." Shortly after midday, they heard swift hoofbeats ahead of them. Naya and Lauren shared a glance. They had sent Shion ahead to scout the way, and if she was returning now, she was coming quickly. Naya waved them all off the road, and they retreated into the trees. "Swords," muttered Naya. She and the other mystics all drew. After a moment, Jem fumbled his own blade from its scabbard. "If it is not Shion, let them pass us, and only fight if we are spotted," said Lauren. But it was Shion after all. As soon as she reached the spot on the road where the rest of them were hiding, she pulled to a stop and waved to them. Lauren walked Midnight out into the open. "If you meant to conceal yourselves, you did a poor job," said Shion. "The marks of your passing are like signal fires." "Enough of that," said Naya. "What is wrong?" "There are soldiers," said Shion. "Yaren guards up ahead." Lauren frowned. "Where our path meets the main road?" "No," said Shion. "Upon the road we travel." That cast a grim mood over all of them. They had taken this way specifically to avoid detection,
believing Yeren would only be watching the major routes. "So we have wasted days in our journey and for little purpose," said Chet. "No," said Lauren. "The main road would have been little better, and there would be no way to keep their watchmen from spotting us, which is what we must try to do now." "Why would they have guards posted unless they knew we were coming this way?" said Naya. "There could be any number of reasons," said Lauren. "It could be a precaution, or they could be on the lookout for another foe entirely." "Do you not think Huel has arrived ahead of us?" said Weeth. "If he has warned them that we are coming." Lauren and Chet shared a look. Huel would not have given such warning, because Lauren and the Mystics should not have known he was in Dahab. They had only come because of Lauren's dream, which only Chet, Jem, and Annis knew about. She could not explain it to the rest of them, not now at any rate. "Of course Huel could have told them that we might come, but he could not have known we would take this route," said Lauren. "And regardless, we cannot turn back now. If anything, we should take this as a sign that Damaris is in Dahab for certain. We must not let her slip away." "There might be a way past the guards," said Shion. "The path we ride now leads to a log bridge. That is where the Yeren guards have placed themselves. But the river beneath the bridge can be crossed another way, bypassing the guards, with Weeth's help." Lauren frowned, but Weeth only nodded. "Say on." "The river runs through a small divide in the land, several paces below the bridge. If we walk through that divide, there is a place close by where the water grows shallow and somewhat calm despite the flooding from the rain. There, Weeth could turn the water to stone, giving us a bridge to cross over. If we are silent, we should be able to avoid the guards' attention." "Why not cross the river somewhere else?" said Annis. "We should do it far from the bridge, so that there is no danger of the guards seeing us." She looked more nervous than the rest of them. Lauren realized that if they were spotted, word would surely fly to Damaris that her daughter had been seen near the city of Dahab. If that happened, Lauren doubted that all the mystics in Underrealm could keep Damaris from hunting them down. But Shion shook her head. "There is nowhere else, at least not that I have seen. Upstream and down, the river moves too quickly. I could search for another calm section, but that would take time, mayhap days." Lauren looked to Weeth. The alchemist nodded. "Shion and I have known each other a long while. I trust her judgment in this." "Very well," said Lauren. "When only one path presents itself, the wise take their first step. Lead the way, Shion." But the mystic hesitated, looking at Naya. Lauren turned to find Naya studying her own hands. "Why do we not simply take the bridge?" said Uzo. "We could dispatch the guards and be on our way in no time." Naya looked up to meet Lauren's gaze. "It would be faster." "No," said Lauren. "There is no need for fighting if subterfuge will serve." "Yet speed is imperative to our mission," said Naya, "and we have wasted days already." "You speak of saving less than an hour's time," said Lauren. Naya turned to Shion. "If we are discovered while we try the more difficult crossing, what will be our position?" Shion's expression remained carefully neutral. "It will be difficult. They will have the high ground, and we would have to climb the river bank to engage them." "There, you see," said Naya. "If anything should go wrong, we will all be at far greater risk." Lauren felt as though the argument were slipping away from her. "If we kill their guards, our advantage will be lost. Speed is important, but so is secrecy. Do you wish to warn all of the family Yeren that we approach Dahab? If we do our job well, no guard will escape to bring such a message. Yet if they do not hear from their guards at all, they will be suspicious regardless. And we will move more slowly than before if one of us is injured in the fight." "That is unlikely," said Jormund with a grim smile. He pressed his fists together until his knuckles cracked. "You risk all of our safety for the sake of some guards you have never met," said Naya, brows drawing together. "While you are willing to wantonly sacrifice the lives of strangers," said Lauren. "I am in command here. We go by the river." Naya's face turned a shade darker, but at last she jerked her horse's reins to the side, nudging it away from the rest of the group. Weeth let out a low whoosh of breath.
Shiyun studied Lauren for a moment, and then turned to lead them off the road.
Ta-da! Chapter 22 done. All right, I got one more chapter in me. But I am going to get myself another burr. And I will burr right back. Hooah! Okay. One more chapter. If we can keep this up, then by the end of next month, we'll be writing Quest again. We won't be done with audiobooks, but we will be waiting for them to be edited. And while we wait for them to be edited, we will be writing Quest. Oh, why are there so many tracks in this session? What is this? Oh, is it just voice samples, probably?
No, any one of us could have done the same. You should not blame yourself. I would call you many things before I called you foolish. Strength of arms is not the only...
Throw them in the river. No doubt the bodies will wash up on the bank, but it will be a waterway that ran south. But almost immediately, it reached a high shelf.
Why are there so many songs about rainbows? Listen, all I know is maybe someday you'll find it.
Chapter 23.
Where is my voice mix?
Chapter 23.
Yeah.
They were closer to the river than Lauren had thought, and soon reached the bank. Looking down, she saw at once what Shiyun had meant about the difficulty in crossing. Its surface was a roiling mass of angry white foam. "We will remain atop the bank for a ways," said Shiyun. "There is no place to safely climb down closer to the water." They had to ride in single file, for the trees pressed close to them on the right-hand side. Lauren rode just behind Shiyun, with Chet behind her, and behind him, Naya and the rest of the party. Once or twice, Lauren glanced behind her, excusing the motion by peering around the jungle first. She caught a glimpse of Naya's face, but the mystic's anger seemed to have faded, or else she was suppressing it. But at least her complexion was no longer so red, and she was not glaring as she had been before. Finally, they reached a place where the ground grew a bit more solid underfoot. There was a little shelf not far below them. Shiyun led them down, so that now they walked on the river's very edge. Lauren guided Midnight to the right, so that the horse did not risk losing her footing in the river's soft mud. Midnight hardly needed the urging. She eyed the water nervously and nickered. Lauren stroked her mane nervously.
Oh, look at that click. That's a rare specimen right there.
Her nervously and nickered. Lauren stroked her mane. They reached a curve in the river. Before they turned it, Shiyun stopped them and bade them to dismount. "On foot from here," she whispered. "Keep yourselves quiet and mind the horses." Lauren passed the command back down the line. As they made their way around the curve, Lauren saw the bridge at last. It was made from a single thick log, taken from a tree so massive that 4 people could not have wrapped their arms around its girth. The trunk had been shorn in half down the middle, so that its top formed a large platform almost 3 paces wide. It lay across the river, one end on each of the banks, which were now 6 paces above their heads. Shiyun stopped and pointed. Lauren peered in the direction of her finger. After a moment she saw it, a figure in a dark green cloak, concealed in a tree on the other side of the river. One of the Yeren guards. But the guard was looking the wrong direction, across the river and up, and was half hidden by branches besides, so she could not see the party making its way along the bank. Raising 2 fingers for silence, Shiyun led them onwards. They crossed beneath the bridge in dead silence. Just after she passed under it, Lauren heard a loud sniff from above. She froze, standing stock still for a moment. Cautiously she glanced up, but she could not see who had made the noise, and there was no other sound. Shiyun pressed on, and Lauren hastened to follow. At last they saw the place Shiyun had mentioned. A tree had collapsed, smaller than the one that formed the bridge, but still sizable. It lay directly across the river, as though human hands had laid it there. It turned the water upstream into a still pool, which gently flowed over the top of the log before turning into the raging floodwaters they had walked beside all this time. There was not enough space for Weith to press forwards to the front of the group, so they all moved down until the alchemist had reached the still waters. Lauren glanced back down the river the way they had come. The log bridge was a ways off, but still too close for comfort. Now would be the most dangerous part of the whole affair. Weith took a deep breath. She knelt at the water's edge and put her hands into it. Lauren could only imagine how cold the water must be, but the alchemist did not complain. From behind her closed eyelids, a gentle light spilled forth. As they all watched in wonder, the water around Weith's hands began to change. It swirled and then solidified. For a brief moment it looked to Lauren as though it had turned to ice, but then the ice went gray and turned harder until it had become stone. The stone rippled farther and farther out into the river, at first in a perfect semicircle, but then, as Weith found her focus, it became a straight line, little more than a pace across. It edged forward slowly, ever so slowly, and each moment seemed an eternity under the threat of the nearby bridge. At last the stone touched the bank on the other side. There it sank into the silt and mud, creeping into the earth like the roots of a tree and anchoring itself to the shore. Weith's eyes opened, and the glow in them brightened. "All right," she gasped. "I shall have to hold it here while the rest of you cross." "What about you?" said Lauren. "I can hold it up for myself at the end, but the rest of you must go first. One at a time. I cannot bear the weight of more." Naya pressed forwards without answering and led her horse across the stone. She walked a bit too slowly for Lauren's liking, but the stone bridge was wet from the splashing water, and Naya had to pick her way carefully. When she had reached the other side, she pressed herself and her horse up against the river bank and waved the rest of them on. Jormund stepped forwards and placed one foot on the bridge. Weith gave a wry smile. "You should eat less, big man." Jormund grinned at her and pressed on. After him went Chet, closely followed by Jem, and then Shiyun and Uzo. Only Weith, Annis, and Lauren remained to cross. Annis looked to Lauren, but Lauren waved a hand at her. "You first." Annis gave her a wan smile and stepped forwards. Lauren's smile vanished the moment Annis turned her back. The girl looked terrified. As a merchant's daughter, she had never engaged in as much physical activity as the rest of them. Across the river, Lauren caught Chet's eye and tossed her head at Annis. He nodded and stepped to the end of the bridge, holding forth a hand, ready to help Annis once she was close enough. The girl moved step by step, each one more cautious than the one before, each one agonizingly slow. When she reached the halfway point, her shoe slid on the wet stone. For a panicked moment, Lauren thought she would fall over. Her shoe slid on the wet Her shoe slid on the wet stone. For a panicked moment, Lauren thought she would fall over. But Annis recovered, throwing both her arms out to steady herself. On she pressed, but now she moved even more slowly, frightened by her near miss. Chet leaned farther forwards, grasping for her outstretched hand. Annis slipped again. Almost within reach of the riverbank, she teetered on one foot. Chet lunged for her, seized the back of her collar, and flung her to the riverbank. But Weith's concentration wavered, and when Chet's foot came down, it slipped right through the stone. He did not cry out as he fell into the river, but that did not matter, for Annis's horse fell too. It struck the water with a thunderous splash and a loud whinny. After their quiet sneaking, Lauren nearly jumped out of her skin at the sound. Shouts came from downriver, and two figures in green cloaks appeared on the bridge. One of them pointed at the party. "Darkness take us," said Lauren. She flung herself onto Midnight's back. The mare plunged into the stream under Lauren's heels and struck out, swimming hard for Chet, who was fighting to reach the shore. The cold river clutched at her legs, making her gasp, and she had to force herself to push Midnight on through the water. Weith sprang up, the glow in her eyes intensifying, and led her horse forwards. Stone rose up from the bridge to meet her hand, maintaining her connection as she held it up for herself and crossed. Behind her horse's hooves, the bridge began to dissolve away, turning to water again and sweeping away downriver. Naya, Jormund, Uzo, and Shiun mounted their horses, and with a battle cry they charged up the riverbank. Jem gave his own thin scream and ran after them, though he had no horse and could not keep up. Chet's head bobbed under the surface of the water until he struck the dam. Lauren thrust out a hand and seized his shoulder, and he pulled himself onto Midnight's back behind her. The horse's hooves found purchase on the bank at last, and she emerged from the river, scattering water in all directions. "Watch after Annis," cried Lauren, as Chet jumped from Midnight's back. "I will, but where are you?" His question was lost as she spurred Midnight after the mystics. The fight had already begun. One Yeren guard lay on her back. Her hands clawed futilely at an arrow in her throat. Jormund had two more occupied, keeping them at bay with great sweeps of his sword. Naya and Uzo had one each. "Why are there so many?" thought Lauren. But all thought fled her as she saw a green cloak rippling. Unseen by the mystics, another guard ran from the fighting. A messenger. They would ride for Dahab and warn the family Yeren. Lauren sent her heels into Midnight's side and went after the guard with a cry. She caught up to the Yeren soldier and tried to leap from the saddle, tackling him to the ground. But Lauren was still not as practiced on horseback as the rest of the party. Her foot caught in the stirrup, and she fell atop him without any control. Her ribs struck a rock, driving the air from her lungs. Dazed and gasping, she rolled away. There came a hiss as the guard drew his sword. He and Lauren fought to their feet almost at the same time. Her bow was unstrung and on Midnight's saddle. She only had her dagger, but she hesitated to use it. What if the guard recognized it and escaped? Or what if one of the other mystics came upon them and saw it? The guard lunged forwards, thrusting his sword. Lauren backstepped and almost stumbled. He swung to the left and then down. Lauren did not let him draw close enough to reach her, but it seemed he was guiding her in some particular direction. She glanced behind her and saw only trees. He swung again and she ducked behind a trunk. Too late, hasty footsteps told her his aim. He ran away from her, straight for Midnight. Lauren went after him. No doubt he had hoped to gain the saddle and ride off before she caught him, but he wore chainmail and heavy boots, and Lauren had always been a fast runner. She tackled him in the knees just before he reached Midnight. To her relief, his sword slid away on the grass, but he surprised her with a kick, and she fell back with explosions of light dancing before her eyes. If he had pressed his advantage, he might have choked the life from her before she could stop him. But he went for the sword instead, and that gave Lauren time to regain her feet. He charged wildly, swinging without skill, hoping to catch her by surprise. Lauren danced back again, but this time he gave her no room to glance behind her. One haphazard swing sent her leaping away, only to strike her head on a low branch. Lauren fell to hands and knees. The guard attacked, sword raised. A knife came flying. It sank into the Yeren guard's side just below the arm. He cried out and dropped his sword. Naya appeared and tore the knife out. The Yeren guard and tore the Naya appeared and tore the knife out. The Yeren guard sank to his knees. She seized his hair, placing the blade to his throat. "Is Damaris in the city?" she hissed. The guard spat at her but missed. "Darkness take you and your kin." Naya drove a knee into his side where she had stabbed him. He screamed. "I will not ask again. Some other of your fellows survived. Only one must live to tell me what I need to know. Tell the truth and it could be you." Lauren rose, her shoulders heaving with deep gasps. But when she saw Naya, she paused. The mystic's clothes and hair had become badly mussed in the fighting, and the high collar of her jerkin had come undone. There, where the leather parted, Lauren could see a mass of scar tissue from some old and terrible wound. The jungle had gone too silent, and Naya looked up at Lauren with a frown. Her skin went a shade paler when she saw Lauren looking at her scar. With a savage twist, she plunged her knife into the Yeren guard's throat. As he fell to the ground, coughing his life into the soil, Naya buttoned up her collar again. The forest went very still for a moment, except for the thrashing of the dying guard. Lauren felt that she should say something, but then they heard the sound of hooves in the underbrush, and Shion came riding into view with Chet. They both pulled to a halt. Chet was still dripping from his dunking in the river. "Where is Annis?" said Lauren. "Safe," said Chet, shivering. "We won the fight. Weath and Gemma were with her." "We must get you dry," said Lauren. "You will catch your death of sickness." She brought Midnight to him, and as he dismounted, she fetched a dry cloak from her saddlebags to wrap around him. "The Edens?" Naya's voice was thick with some emotion hastily hidden, though whether it was anger or embarrassment, Lauren could not tell. The mystic woman was still looking at her. Indeed, she had not removed her gaze since Lauren saw the scars at her throat. "All dead," said Shion. Chet's expression grew dark. "The Yarans in Dahab will know something is amiss, but no one remains to tell them just what it is."
Hey, Ari. Editing goes well.
"Very well," said Naya. With her gaze still locked on Lauren, she bared her lips in a fierce grin. "It appears we might as well have charged the bridge after all, Nightblade." Lauren flushed with anger. She tilted her head towards the corpse on the ground. "Mayhap, but then this one might have gotten away, for he would have had time to escape while you were fighting." That gave Naya pause. At last she turned away, staring at the man on the ground. "Mayhap. We cannot change what has happened. Only now we must move with haste, and accomplish our aims in Dahab before Yeren notices their missing patrol. The moment they do, they will send someone to search for them." She reached up a hand, and Shion pulled her into the saddle. They rode off back towards the others, while Lauren rubbed Chet's arms to warm him. "They killed the Yerens," said Chet quietly. "All of them." Bowing her head, Lauren wrapped her arms around him, trying to pass her warmth to him through the cloak. "I know. They are warriors. This is what they are trained to do. Yet you are supposed to be in command of them, and you told them you did not wish—" Lauren released him, climbed onto Midnight's saddle, and met his gaze. "I am not their master. They are my guards, not my servants." Chet turned away from her to look ahead through the jungle. "I did not wish for this," she told him quietly. "I know."
Dun dun dun. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Pew, 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 pew. Hey, thanks for the follow, Demagogue69. Nice. Welcome to the stream. Hope you enjoy your time here. We are working on an audiobook right now, but normally I am typically writing a book. That's what I spend the majority of my time doing here. Although you wouldn't know it to look at the Twitch stream recently, because it turns out that making an audiobook is a long process. Bum, 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 bum. Chapter 23 done. Oh my god. Oh my god, y'all. Okay. You ready for this? Y'all ready for this? That officially puts us at the halfway mark for Weremage. We're halfway through the number of chapters, and we are halfway through the number of word count for the Weremage audiobook. So that's very exciting. And we will pick it up tomorrow bright and early with chapter 24. I will throw a raid. I don't know who. I don't stream late anymore, so I have no idea who am I raiding today. Hey, Nagasaki is is streaming, I should say. We love her. Fantastic gaming and variety streamer. All around lovely person and queer online content creator, and all these things are good. So say hi to Nagasaki for me. I need to go to bed. I am going to try to get up early in order to get back to work and keep up on my hours. However, there is a slight chance that I'm going to wake up in the morning and be like, nope, and go back to bed. So if you don't see me tomorrow streaming before 6 o'clock, don't judge me too hard. I'm a very tired man. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. I hope that you're all doing well. Good to see some of you who I haven't seen for a while because I haven't done later streams. And until next time, peace out. Bye.
She had a great stream, but she'd been doing a lot of work around the house during the day. Oh, that's fine. I'm just curious if she's having a good stream is all. I'm glad to hear that. Oh my god, all the raids. Black! Novel! Thank you for the read! Billy! How you doing? What'd you do tonight? Hello, you guys. Thank you so much for the love. Thank you, Crumbas. Yeah, you guys, please go check out a VlogaNovel. They're a writer. Not too bad. I always miss your streams because I've been streaming so early recently. That's okay, dude. It's great to see you. Hey, Rad. Hi. Did you get a lot done, or were you playing? Were you playing games? What were you doing on stream tonight? I just hit the halfway point on my next audiobook edit. Woo, cool. You got a lot of things done. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Hey, water. Aw. Oh, that's good your schedule is earlier. I've been trying to adjust mine. Mine keeps going later and later. It's been bad. It's been real bad. Oh, these guys are cool. Arla Storm warning, stop it. The hell. Little high, little low. Ooh. That's a pretty dino. Okay. Good to me. True me. Fly guy, hi. So, have you been streaming a lot? Are you only doing a couple streams a week? How's it been going, Novel? Just kill the man. Life had just begun. Now I've gone and thrown it all away. This time tomorrow. It's not hard work, but it can get monotonous. I had a couple of scenes today where I was really, really happy with my voice performance. So that was nice